because energy is equivalent to work, and because work is equivalent to food and shelter, if you make energy expensive, what you do is you starve the poor. And you don't have to starve them very much before they become desperate and things fall apart, and then we fall into these positive feedback loops. And so when you hear these bloody globalist utopians talk about the necessity for higher energy costs, you remember that comes directly at the cost of the world's poor. Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, 2 weeks ago had the unmitigated and I would say quasi-demonic gall to announce publicly that $8 a gallon gasoline in Canada was actually probably a good thing, because Canadians should be reminded nonstop just how severe the climate crisis is every time they fill up their cars. And that's perfectly bloody fine unless you're living on the edge of your economic capability. And the fact that you can't afford to fill up your car anymore puts you into unemployment and food deprivation in relationship to your children. And that's in the rich West. And now in Europe, we're so goddamn stupid on our energy policy because of these idiot environmental schemes that we've made ourselves pathologically reliant on the Russians. And we're going to bloody well see what that costs us. And I know the Germans are burning coal again because their switch, massively expensive and counterproductive switch to so-called renewals, has been another catastrophe. And so now God only knows how expensive energy is going to become. The Dutch government put pressure on the farmers recently because a legislative body that was EU controlled, that's my understanding, decided in favor of an idiot environmental group and the court compelled the government, so that's a non-legislative body, by the way, the court compelled the government to act in relation to the farmers. And apparently the farmers have had enough of this.
The bureaucrats in Brussels, they are ruling by decree, right? And of course, it has nothing to do with nitrogen. Here they're talking about nitrogen. It has nothing to do with nitrogen. It has nothing to do with ammonium. It has to do with numerous things. One is taking the land, just as happened with Stalin in Ukraine, labeling the farmers kulaks in Ukraine, the Ukrainian farmers, and attacking and killing them. Here in Netherlands, there's an information campaign to make the farmers look like bad guys here as well. I mean, these are the new kulaks, right? Meanwhile, let me tell you something about farmers. I have spent more than half of my life overseas, more than 80 countries, a lot of war. I'm always going out with farmers, right?
Farmers are so much, they're like truckers in that regard. They're so much in contact with the...
They have
they're like
sense.
Electricians and contractors and carpenters. That's why Christ was a carpenter, by the way, because if you're not honest, you can't build a house that stands up, man. And he wasn't a PhD sociologist. He was a carpenter. And those people who have to have their hands in the dirt and their feet on the ground, they have a sense about how the world works that's practical and embodied that the pin-headed academic globalists lack entirely and are also often incredibly jealous of. And so in Canada, it was the farmers and the truckers who rose up, the misogynists and the bigots and the racists in our prime minister's terms. And then that's triggered these co-occurring protests in the US and in Holland. And now, it isn't easy to get farmers upset either, because those tractors that they bring to the protests, those things are bloody expensive, and most of the farmers don't own them. They have to finance them, and so they're running on very thin margins, 3 to 5% a year generally, and you have to be one canny person to run a big farm in a modern economy. You have to be paying attention to all sorts of unbelievably complicated and sophisticated things. And so when the farmers have been pushed to the point where they're willing to take time away from their farms to spray manure on the government steps, it's probably time to listen.
The World Economic Forum is trying to control food supply, right? That is production and distribution, right? And so, and one of the ways to do this is, as Stalin did and Mao did in China, and Stalin did in Ukraine and Russia, is to take the farms away from the traditional farmers and then put your farmers on that land. That started in Canada, jumped over to the United States. It's over here now. I mean, it's really growing. This courage is spreading. And so, and you see Italian farmers, Spanish farmers, people are rising up. And the more they realize what's actually happening, because, the man behind the curtain is the WEF, the World Economic Forum. Of course, we're going to have to deal with China, but at this rate, look, if Germany falls from these energy issues, which is looking pretty likely at this point, China is going to peel off the rock too, right? As are we, economically, right? If the energy doesn't get turned back on and through the Nord Stream, things are going to get emotional, right? All across Europe, including here. Now, most of the Dutch that I talk with, I was talking with a member of parliament the other day. He was completely oblivious to the famines, right? And most of the Dutch people I speak with actually don't seem to see that, which is but these stores are nicely stocked, and this is Netherlands. It's a place of plenty. It's milk and honey here, you know?
Yeah,
and so it's kind of, as you know, you're a student of history. Often, before the storm, everything's quite nice and the wine is flowing, and that's the way it is right now.
I don't know if there's a more intelligently and compassionately and justly civilized country in the world than the Netherlands. So let's think about that country. I mean, first of all, it shouldn't even exist. The Dutch had to literally drain the oceans and build walls just to make the country exist. And believe me, man, you bloody well better be organized in order to do that. And they did that hundreds of years ago and put together this unbelievable system of irrigation and drainage that ran on those amazing windmills, which are technological marvels. And Dutch society is unbelievably civil and peaceful and productive and interesting and culturally vibrant. It's a great country. So we don't want to underestimate the central significance of Holland. And then obviously of the Netherlands. Obviously that country is predicated to some degree for its success on the provision of stable food supplies and these unbelievably efficient farmers. And so the fact that they are up in arms about all this is of signal, symbolic, and practical importance, which is why I think it's so necessary to focus on their concerns, and also so appalling that this isn't headline news in every legacy media outlet across the West. Because when the Dutch farmers are upset and moving en masse the way they are, something has gone seriously wrong. This is a canary in the coal mine situation.
It really is. And you know, as you mentioned, the sophistication of these people in general. I mean, basically the Netherlands, the sophistication of building this country out of nothing. I mean, it's basically flat pyramids. I call this, just think of the pyramids flat. I mean, this is a very difficult country to build. And yet they did it back without modern machines. They did it just their brains and their brawn, and they did it in persistence and organization. And the farmers, again, we can't understate this. The farmers are a backbone of this culture. And when it comes to information wars, whether that be Mao unmooring Chinese or the Russians doing this, you know, creating the Soviet Union, you want to cut people from their boat anchors, cut them from their cultural anchors, and then you can, then they're very easy targets for many things. For instance, genocide, for one, and another is menticide, right? Rape of the mind, which is a great book, which was written in Netherlands, right? Rape of the Mind, 1956, one of the best books on brainwashing I've ever read, written right here. You know, because this has happened many times in the past, it's going to continue to happen in the future.